Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first meeting here on September 5th of the 2023-2024 school year. I'd like to acknowledge that the Campbell River Board of Education and the meeting this evening is taking place on the traditional territories of the Likoto people. Please note that there is a short production delay between the live event that you are viewing and the meeting participants. The question and answer function is open for questions on agenda items throughout this meeting, and a final call for questions will be made after the last agenda item, and the questions will be addressed at the end of the session. So I'd like to start this evening with Chairperson's remarks. To all students, staff, and families, and for those newly arrived in our kindergarten classrooms and community, we look forward to working together to provide an amazing educational experience for you here this year in SD 72 Campbell River. As we begin our 2023-24 school year, I'd like to draw your attention to a new face at the board table and introduce Jeff Manning as SD 72 Campbell River's new superintendent and CEO. Jeff comes to our district with over 20 years experience in senior level education and believes through collaboration, active listening, and relationship building, we together can continue to support and improve outcomes for the children in our system. He began his education career as a teacher at the elementary and middle school levels before moving into school-based management, followed by senior leadership roles as Director of Instruction, Deputy Superintendent, and Acting Superintendent in the Comox Valley. Jeff's belief in holding the child at the center of every decision aligns his educational philosophy with the work that we, the Board of Education, have tasked him with as we prepare to launch the 2024 to 29 strategic plan. Welcome to the team, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Jeff replaces Dr. Jeremy Morrow, who at the close of the 22-23 school year accepted the position of superintendent in the Comox Valley. Jeremy contributed much through his career here in the Campbell River region. His dynamic leadership and professional humility helped to open communication channels and prime our educational community for the systemic changes needed to meet the evolving needs of students. He led from the belief that each child has a unique set of talents and abilities, and that we as adults have a responsibility to help them discover, witness, and celebrate their individuality. I, on behalf of the Board of Education, both past and current, wish him the best as he continues his professional journey. Thank you, Jeremy. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the senior team and their flexibility as we transition between leaders, and to highlight Associate Superintendent Phil Sismic for stepping into the interim superintendent role without hesitation while juggling the many other aspects of his diverse portfolio. The skills that you contribute individually and collectively allowed SD 72 Campbell River to move into this year with little interruption. And finally, I am still looking forward to another amazing year of learning, discovering new relationships and ongoing support for the children that we will meet and grow to know throughout these next few months. Welcome back and best wishes for a phenomenal school year. I'd like to move on to new superintendent's remarks.
Thank you, Charity. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to keep it brief on my first official day, really, in Campbell River School District. I had a wonderful experience today of being able to travel to all of the schools in the local area, not counting SA Word in the island schools, getting to meet with all the principals and seeing what the first day of school was like, seeing excited children and excited parents coming to school for the first time if they were kindergarten students, and those transitioning in grade 6 and grade 9. It was just a wonderful day, and I couldn't think of a better way to spend that time on my first day in the district. I'm really excited to be a part of this team, to be a part of this district, and I'm looking forward to some great things to come. So looking forward to getting to know you all a lot better and getting to serve you as your superintendent of schools. Thank you very much.
You like it should cheer or something. Well done, Superintendent Manning. So moving forward to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of June 20th. I know that it seems like it's in the midst of time now, but the motion reads that the minutes of the meeting of June 20th are hereby approved as circulated. Moved by trustee Harper, seconded by trustee Gladish. All those in favor? So moved. On to additions or alterations to the agenda. Seeing none, the motion reads that the agenda is hereby approved as circulated. May I have a mover? Moved by trustee Gillis, seconded by trustee Hagan. All those in favor? So moved. And on to Vice Chair Gillis regarding the report of board decisions from the September 5th confidential board meeting.
Yes. We had a very productive meeting dealing with teaching, administrative and support staff changes and property, legal and financial issues.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gillis. Item 8 is correspondence. Seeing none, on to 9, which is public submissions, none as well. Agenda submissions, there are none this evening. Educational submissions, again, nothing this evening. On to agenda item 12, which is the presentation of the 22-23 schedule of internally restricted surplus by Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
This is quite exciting. I've never had a full meeting just for one finance.
Oh, yay!
So, buckle up. You can ask as many questions as you want, and you may need to, because this year things have changed from what we've typically brought to the board at this meeting in the past. Tonight, we're going to be asking you to pass and support a list of reserves that have been identified. Some of them have been targeted and some of them have not been targeted. So really we can go through the list. In the past, we would typically just bring the totals. We're going to ask the board to pass the reserves tonight, and then they get incorporated into the financial statements, and they will actually be a note and they'll be a part of the financial statement. So this is actually reserves for last year. I will get into a little bit of financial performance today, but really the financial statements come at the next meeting. So we'll there's a bit of a prelude to how well we did, and it'll help kind of explain some of the reasons. So our board has a surplus governance policy. Surplus, reserves, carry forwards, appropriations, there's many different names that we, and that I in particular, I use all of them interchangeably. But for the purposes of tonight, I will refer to them as reserves. Even though the board surplus, it's actually called the surplus policy. And what surplus or reserves are the savings over time that the board has accumulated. It's been used in budget deficits in the past. It can be used for different levels of spending. But in our surplus policy, there's some guidelines on how we should spend it, how the board should spend it, and how what management should be bringing forward for those recommendations. So really what it is the board's task management to take a look at the reserves and make recommendations to the board on how those reserves should be used. Within our surplus policy, there's a couple of things. Emergent items shouldn't support ongoing operations, just in case you have a COVID year where you need to use a reserve to cover overages. Any operational items might have to be stopped once that savings is gone. The process has to be transparent. What's new this year is we're not just bringing a list of what we're recommending. We're bringing a list of the activity in the year. And so we can really tie in what we started the year with, which was here. So we started with these savings. And then there are various adjustments. So the Indigenous program adjustment of $81,000 was a labor settlement that was included. And then we have what the annual revenue was and what the spending was. And you'll notice with the Indigenous program, we started the year with $128,000 in savings. And the spending exceeded the revenue, which means that there's a $90,000 left over. Indigenous targeted funds are the only funds that the Ministry of Ed formally recognizes that should be targeted. Everything else that is up here is actually at the discretion of the board. If ever pressed by the ministry, they'll claim that only Indigenous program funds are targeted. Everything else can be used. So we'll have, but this is the recommendations that we've made. And the other key item too is the emergency contingency. The surplus policy will actually speak about where that should be. Emergency contingency will likely come up at the next board meeting. The auditor is going to recommend 2 to 4% of emergency contingency. In our district, that's probably reaching $2.5 to $3 million that they feel you should have set aside at any given time to cover a sudden overspend. We've got an $80 million budget. You go over a couple of percent and you may need that. But what our district has kind of settled on is a emergency contingency at the 2% level, which is this year sort of a targeted amount of $1.3 million. So I will just kind of cover our financial performance first, and then I'll come back to this. So the good news is we had a pretty good year. This number, we've the biggest number that you really need to focus on is this one. So we had combined reserves of $2.185 million, and we're ending the year above that at $2.3 million. 3 years ago, we had $6 million in reserves. We had to use those through COVID, through inflationary surprises. So what the great news is about this is this tells us that we've gotten ahead of those inflationary expenses. We've gotten ahead of the TTFC costs. So we're going up, which is really good. Now what you can see between that difference is what the operating increase is. And now this is where it kind of gets a little bit more complicated, which in your memo, I have this little thing right here, which is a reserve reconciliation. So $50,000 is pretty good, but on an operating basis, we've actually increased. We have a surplus of $475,000. And the reason for that difference is because for school supplies, we actually we overspent by $262,000. Now they could do that because they drew down their savings from $300,000 down to, I believe, like $60,000. Indigenous Ed, I just spoke about them. They overspent as well. And so when you overspend from savings, you have a choice. You can either choose to spend it or you cannot spend it. Now, what we want to know really is what is our structural surplus or deficit? We're actually in a structural surplus because, and not just that structural surplus of $50,000, we are in a structural surplus of an operating reserve of 474. And then when you get into the structural, so the ongoing sort of costs that contributed to that, that 474 is where it is because last year we used a benefit holiday, which we could only take once, 1 year. And we also, for the next year, are planning on drawing $100,000 from international surplus. So you take that $300,000 out, and we have a structural surplus of about $174,000 on an ongoing basis. That's great news. There have been a lot of reductions to get to that point, and really what this last year demonstrated is that we are there. So now we're waiting for increases in students, and that will start to get us on our way. Next week, I will point out a couple, or next meeting, I will point out a couple of items where, of course, there's always new emerging concerns. But a structural surplus is really positive. Now we'll go back. We'll go back to these reserves here. So
Just a question.
Yeah.
Is this the first time we've had a structural surplus in quite a few years?
Yes, in quite a few years, yes. But in my time here, we have had structural surpluses in the past. And but just fleetingly, like 1 or 2 years, right? And things will kind of catch up. So, yeah, so I may not go through absolutely everything. But ones to note, the school supply accounts, we started the year $357,000 in savings. We did encourage them to spend that money. The funds are given to the school for use of students in their school that year. We want them to use it. We asked them to use it, and actually we made some budget reductions to encourage them to use it. And use it, they did. They have $94,000 left over. So we are proposing that they continue to carry forward that 94,000. So the yellow column is a proposal column that we would like the board to support. International is another one to point out. So they started the year with $100,000 in savings. They increased, so they spent less than they made, which increased their savings to 126. Now, what that change there of 100 is we had proposed in last year's, in the budget for this year, that the board passed in May, was to use $100,000 to balance the budget, the operating budget of this current year. So we moved that over from international program to international program to balance budget. Emergency contingency. So really what that 2%, the red says is it should be $1.3 million. But what our surplus policy says is that we're not going to make cuts to increase that budget. That it'll have to be done at a surplus that is left over from year to year. So now that 474, the difference between this one and here, that 474 can be reallocated. But this year, because there have been some emergent needs that we'll talk to, we're proposing to put about half of it into rebuilding that emergency contingency. So we'll propose 694, which will get us, you know, halfway to the goal. Let's get down to some of the recommendations. So I'm just noticing here that some of these additions, I'll have to put that 30 over into the yellow. But some of the new additions this year, so last year we didn't have any additions, but this year we have identified some. First one, health and safety, $30,000. We're having a growing need for safety supports. We will be bringing forward some other requests to the board later. But some of the one-time items that we had identified were some consulting support that we would like to make available to the health and safety department to get up some compliance issues. So we're asking for $30,000 there. Strategic priorities. So this was subject to some of the cuts that we had earlier a couple of years ago. It used to be $300,000. And so this was $300,000 available to the superintendent to be able to pursue the board's strategic goals. And about 2 years ago, we had to reduce it in half. So it's been $150,000 for 2 years, but we have a new superintendent. The board's working on a new strategic plan. This doesn't fully restore, but it significantly puts back resources to help pursue the new strategic priorities. Rob conferencing, this has actually been on there before. We use the Rob Run conference room meeting space regularly for district staff. This doesn't get air conditioning in there, but this will help support just some of the room renos. We actually, I think next week you will see that we are gonna apply for mechanical upgrade for Rob Run to cool that space. So this combination will be a pretty good time to start updating some of that meeting space. And then the last one is the Sims replacement. We have a enterprise management system that we've had for about 30 years. And it is probably getting close to end of life. And to replace a system like this, it can be anywhere from like $600,000 to $1 million. But the purchase plans for those Sometimes they can be built into annual licensing fees and paid over a couple of years. Sometimes they can't change an outright purchase. But one thing that is for sure is you need implementation costs. You need release time for staff. You need training time for staff. Sometimes you need extra help for the trainers. So we're asking for 50 to start that process. I know Delta has the exact same system that we have since they started saving about 5 years ago, and they're at $144,000 because they're doing the same thing, little bit by little bit, but they've had some hard financial years. So we'd like to start building that fund for a future replacement. So just going to, there we go. I don't know how to find it. There. So again, the yellow is the recommendations that we're asking the board to pass for tonight. So yeah, I can do a bit more of a detailed financial analysis in person next week. But we'll look for the board to pass the reserve tonight. This schedule of spending, we have been asked to do this by the ministry. It is supposed to go, it will go up onto our website displayed like this, which again is different than past years. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what their initial link is on the population that we've got this year.
So population, we are projecting to go up 61 FTE. It's looking like we'll be close to that. So still early. We don't have secondary or middle school numbers, and we're not looking at explosive growth yet. But we're thinking that it will be positive. So
I have a question that maybe you cannot answer, Kevin, but I know that the director of tech just happens to be here. So with the Sims replacement, should we be thinking about budgeting like a tech budget to handle new software, like organizational software? Like, is that something that we should be setting aside a budget for as we have unrestricted surplus?
So they wouldn't say no to that. What's different is back 20 years ago, you'd purchase software. So you would actually have to plan that when that software was out of date, that you would purchase new. Everybody's going by licensing fees. So for our Microsoft products, we spend $80,000 a year to get access to. So we don't actually have to purchase it anymore. With the Sims replacement, you actually do have a purchase price, and then you have a ongoing annual license. So let's say Sims system would be like $20 to replace, and then you would have a $50,000 or $60,000 annual fee for maintenance, upgrades, updates, things like that. What one vendor has asked, so before we embarked on this process, we actually put together a committee that looked at 10 or 12 different products just to see if there was a product that could meet the functionality of the program we have. Why we've kept it for 30 years is because it was really good. It actually covered everything that we needed to do. As it kind of became out of date visually, still functionally, it did everything that we needed it to do. And it's only been recently that we've found programs when this committee reviewed that could do 95% of what we needed. So but one of the programs that they looked at would build the purchase price in over 3 years. So it would kind of bring that down. So this system's kind of unique and it'll be different then. It's different than MyEd, which had its purchase price built in over 10 years. And different than a lot of the software programs that our tech use.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, then I guess we'll look for a motion to support the proposed internally restricted reserve.
Do you have a question? You moving the motion?
No, I'm moving the motion, and thank you for making that really clear about the structural deficits, which are with the unrestricted surplus. Like, that was very clear. I couldn't get it. I'm just reading it by myself, but your explanation was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So the motion reads that the 2022-23 schedule of internally restricted reserves be accepted as presented. So moved by trustee Harper, seconded by trustee Hagan. All those in favor, any questions? The motion is passed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for your explanation. And I know that you work with numbers all the time and sometimes find it challenging to explain to us when you know it so deeply. So thank you for making it easy to digest. Persevering with your board.
I enjoy this. I think you were the ones that had to persevere.
So, there are no other agenda items this meeting. Is there any questions from anyone, regarding agenda items this meeting? An online question? No, there are none. Give it a moment, just because that was unexpected that we would be done our agenda so quickly this evening. Probably for everyone. People are just tuning in.
Just finished making their G and T.
All right,
Thought there'd be a cast of thousands to see the
they're usually,
superintendent.
yeah. Sure.
Who says there aren't?
Yeah, who says there aren't?
Just looking.
So.
So, a motion for adjournment. Trustee Hagan,
So moved.
so moved.